In a kingdom torn apart by rebellion, ambition, and the struggle for succession, one man rose to claim the crown amid chaos: Stephen of Blois, a king born into privilege, yet thrust into peril, would fight not only for his throne but for the very survival of his dynasty. His reign was defined by battles both on the field and in the court, where loyalty could be as fleeting as the shifting tides of war. From baronial revolts to the deadly political games of 12th century England, Stephen's life was a relentless test of courage, cunning, and endurance. He faced rivals, enemies, and even family in his quest to secure the crown, leaving a legacy of conflict, compromise, and resilience. This is the story of a king whose crown was forged in ruler who would shape the destiny of England against overwhelming odds. Watch this epic tale of King Stephen to the end. Like, subscribe, and witness how one man's battles forged a dynasty that shaped England forever. One early Lafendrais to the throne, Stephen of Blois was born in 1092 into the powerful house of Blois, a lineage intertwined with the destinies of England and France. His father, Stephen, Count of Blois, was a French noble of considerable influence, and his mother, Adelaide of Normandy, was the niece of William the Conqueror, giving Stephen a claim to English blood. From his earliest days, Stephen's life was marked by the duality of privilege and peril. He inherited not only wealth and connections, but also the complex web of loyalties and rivalries that defined the Anglo-Norman aristocracy. Stephen grew up amidst the turbulence of post-conquest England, a land where titles and lands could be won or lost by marriage, inheritance, or the sword. His family maintained close ties with the English crown, and young Stephen was educated in both the art of warfare and the intricacies of courtly politics. He learned early that being a noble was as much about navigating alliances as it was about demonstrating valor on the battlefield. By his adolescence, Stephen had already distinguished himself as a competent knight and capable administrator. He participated in military campaigns in Normandy and England, gaining a reputation for bravery and leadership. Chroniclers of the time noted his charisma, his ability to inspire loyalty among his retainers, and his sharp intelligence qualities that would serve him well in the turbulent years to come. Yet Stephen was also aware that his path to power would not be straightforward. England's royal line was fraught with uncertainty. King Henry I, the last surviving son of William the Conqueror, had secured the succession for his daughter Matilda, but her position as a female heir in a male-dominated feudal society was fragile. This ambiguity set the stage for Stephen's eventual claim. Stephen's rise was facilitated by his marriage to Matilda of Boulogne, heiress of Boulogne, and significant lands in northern France. Their union was both a love match and a strategic alliance, strengthening Stephen's political and economic power. Matilda was a formidable partner, intelligent, ambitious, and politically astute. Together, they represented a combination of military capability and dynastic ambition that made Stephen a serious contender for the English crown. In 1135, King Henry I's death triggered a succession crisis. His daughter, Empress Matilda, had been designated heir, but the nobility was divided. Many English barons were hesitant to accept a female ruler, fearing instability and the erosion of their own influence. Stephen, with his royal connections, military experience, and charismatic leadership, seized the opportunity. Within weeks, he crossed the Channel to England, rallying support from nobles who preferred a male king over a female claimant. His swift and decisive action demonstrated both political cunning and boldness, the hallmarks of a warrior born to battle. Stephen's claim was bolstered by his maternal lineage. As the nephew of William the Conqueror through his mother Adelaide, he could argue legitimacy based on blood, while his French connections provided additional resources and allies. The English barons, wary of prolonged civil war, but skeptical of Matilda's capacity to rule, gradually rallied to Stephen's cause. In November 1135, he was crowned King Stephen of England in Westminster Abbey, initiating a reign that would be defined by warfare, diplomacy, and the constant struggle to maintain authority. Yet the crown brought little immediate peace. Stephen faced the immediate challenge of consolidating power, securing loyalty among barons with shifting allegiance, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Matilda's supporters. The early years of his reign were a delicate balancing act, rewarding loyalty, punishing dissent, and demonstrating that he could wield the crown with authority. Unlike the smooth succession his father had hoped for, Stephen inherited a kingdom on the brink of civil war, a land where every alliance could shift, and every battle could determine the fate of the crown. Stephen's early reign also revealed his personal style of leadership. He combined diplomacy with audacity, preferring negotiation when possible but never shying away from battle when circumstances demanded. His charisma allowed him to inspire loyalty among men who might otherwise have been swayed by rival claimants. However, his reliance on charm and persuasion sometimes drew criticism. Historians later debated whether Stephen's tendency to compromise weakened the crown at critical moments. Nevertheless, his decisiveness in claiming the throne and securing initial support demonstrated that he was a ruler capable of seizing opportunities and shaping events to his advantage. In addition to political and military challenges, Stephen had to navigate the intricate dynamics of family and succession. His marriage to Matilda of Boulogne produced children who would carry forward his dynastic ambitions, ensuring that the crown would remain linked to his bloodline. Stephen's role as a father intertwined with his role as a king. Each decision regarding alliances, military campaigns, and governance carried long-term consequences for the stability and future of his dynasty. By the end of this first phase of his reign, Stephen had achieved a remarkable feat. He had crossed into England, rallied support, and ascended the throne in a period of extreme uncertainty. Yet the battles that lay ahead, the conflicts with Empress Matilda, the baronial uprisings, and the constant struggle to maintain authority would test every skill he possessed. Stephen of Blois was now king, but his crown was fragile, forged in a world of shifting loyalties and relentless ambition. The stage was set for the prolonged period of conflict that would define his legacy, the era later known as the Anarchy, a time when England itself teetered on the edge of civil war. To the Anarchy begins battles and betrayals. The death of King Henry I in 1135 plunged England into a succession crisis that would erupt into a nearly 2-decade-long civil war, later remembered as the Anarchy. Though Stephen of Blois had secured the crown swiftly, his kingship was immediately contested by Empress Matilda, Henry's designated heir, whose supporters refused to recognize Stephen as the rightful ruler. From the very beginning, Stephen's reign was defined by fragile alliances, shifting loyalties, and the ever-present threat of rebellion. Stephen's first challenge was to consolidate his authority across a kingdom that was far from unified. England's barons held immense local power, often commanding private armies and fortifications. Their allegiance was fluid, based on opportunity rather than loyalty. To strengthen his position, Stephen relied on both diplomacy and decisive military action. In 1136, he marched north to suppress a rising rebellion in Northumbria, demonstrating his willingness to confront opposition personally. His charisma and battlefield presence inspired confidence among his followers, but the uprising also revealed the precarious nature of his authority. The Empress Matilda, based in Normandy, was not idle. She marshaled support from powerful nobles and foreign allies, sending forces across the Channel to challenge Stephen's rule. One of her most formidable supporters was her half-brother, Robert of Gloucester, whose military skill and loyalty provided a rallying point for opposition. Early encounters between Stephen's forces and Matilda's allies were inconclusive, leading to a prolonged struggle in which the kingdom became a patchwork of territories loyal to either claimant. Castles changed hands frequently, villages were devastated, and the population endured the harsh realities of civil war. Stephen's strategic approach combined patience with opportunism. He fortified key towns and castles, understanding that control of strongholds could dictate the ebb and flow of power. Winchester, Oxford, and Bristol became critical centers of authority, with Stephen personally overseeing garrisons and negotiating with local barons to ensure their loyalty. He also recognized the importance of symbolism. Maintaining a visible and active kingship reassured his followers and projected confidence to potential defenders. Yet Stephen's reliance on negotiation and compromise sometimes drew criticism. His tendency to release captured nobles or grant concessions in exchange for temporary allegiance was seen by some as a weakness. T's approach, though pragmatic, allowed Matilda's faction to regroup and maintain pressure on the crown. The early years of the Anarchy were marked by a series of stalemates, sieges, and shifting allegiance, demonstrating that Stephen's leadership, while courageous, was continually tested by circumstances beyond his control. One of the defining moments of this period came in 1139, when Empress Matilda herself crossed the Channel with a small army, aiming to assert her claim directly. Stephen responded swiftly, mobilizing his forces to contain her advance. Initial skirmishes were inconclusive, But the threat of Matilda's arrival galvanized Stephen's supporters. He proved himself adept at rapid mobilization, rallying knights and levies to defend strategic points while maintaining communication with his loyal barons. The Civil War was no longer abstract. It was a battlefield reality, and Stephen was at its center. Stephen's personal style of leadership became increasingly evident during these early conflicts. Unlike rulers who relied solely on advisors or delegated authority, Stephen often led from the front. Chroniclers noted his courage in battle, his willingness to take risks, and his ability to inspire loyalty among both knights and infantry. Yet these qualities came at a cost. Constant campaigning strained his resources, tested his health, and created friction among barons who resented his demands or questioned his judgment. The delicate balance between command and diplomacy defined the early years of his reign. The political landscape was further complicated by regional rebellions. In the west, barons who had supported Matilda seized castles and towns, requiring Stephen to divert attention and resources repeatedly. Each campaign was a test of endurance, strategy, and patience. At times, Stephen's forces faced famine, treachery, or outright betrayal, highlighting the difficulty of maintaining control in a fragmented and war-torn kingdom. Stephen's marriage to Matilda of Boulogne proved invaluable during this period. She was not only a partner in governance, but also an active participant in political and military matters. Her diplomatic skills helped maintain alliances with wavering barons, and she occasionally oversaw the defense of key territories when Stephen was on campaign. Their partnership reinforced Stephen's authority, projecting stability and reinforcing the legitimacy of his rule in a time of uncertainty. By the end of the 1140s, Stephen had stabilized parts of England, but the war was far from over. The kingdom remained divided. Castles changed hands frequently, and the shadow of Empress Matilda's claim loomed over every political decision. These early years demonstrated that Stephen's reign would not be defined solely by coronation or inheritance, but by his ability to navigate war, diplomacy, and the ever-shifting loyalties of his nobles. His crown, though won, was constantly under threat, and every day required strategic foresight, personal courage, and political acumen. Stephen's early battles, compromises, and political maneuverings set the tone for the decades of civil war that would follow. He proved himself a resilient and adaptive ruler, capable of sustaining authority in a fractured kingdom. Yet the challenges he faced, rebellion, rival claimants, and the capricious nature of medieval politics would continue to define his reign. The anarchy had begun in earnest, and Stephen's destiny as a king tested by fire was just unfolding. 3. The wars intensify. Stephen's military struggle as the 1140s progressed. Stephen of Blois found his kingship increasingly defined by warfare. The early skirmishes with Empress Matilda's supporters had given way to full-scale campaigns that spanned the length and breadth of England. The anarchy, as chroniclers would later call it, was not a brief conflict, but a prolonged struggle in which castles, towns, and families were caught between two rival claimants. Stephen, ever pragmatic and battle-hardened, had to navigate not only the perils of open combat but also the shifting allegiances of powerful barons whose loyalty could change overnight. One of the turning points of this period was the capture of Stephen himself in 1141 during the Battle of Lincoln, a devastating blow to his authority. Matilda's forces, led by her half-brother Robert of Gloucester, outmaneuvered Stephen's army, demonstrating the strategic acumen of his rival faction. Imprisoned and temporarily removed from power, Stephen experienced firsthand the fragility of royal authority in a kingdom fractured by civil war. His capture sent shockwaves through England, emboldening Matilda's supporters and forcing Stephen's allies to regroup under desperate circumstances. Yet even in captivity, Stephen's presence was a rallying point. His wife, Queen Matilda of Boulogne, proved instrumental in sustaining his faction. She traveled across the kingdom, raising armies, securing financial support, and shoring up the loyalty of wavering barons. Her energy and determination demonstrated that the struggle for the crown was not fought by the king alone. The Queen's influence and political skill were crucial in maintaining Stephen's claim during his imprisonment. It was during these years that the partnership between Stephen and Boulogne solidified into a defining element of his reign. Stephen's release later that year, following a prisoner exchange for Robert of Gloucester, allowed him to reassert his authority. Although weakened politically, Stephen demonstrated resilience, and strategic flexibility. He reoccupied key castles, re-established alliances, and conducted campaigns to regain territories lost during his absence. The cycle of sieges, battles, and negotiations continued, highlighting the ebb and flow of power in a kingdom where military prowess and political cunning were inseparable. Throughout this period, Stephen honed his approach to warfare and governance. He learned to balance direct military engagement with strategic diplomacy, often using marriages, land grants, and negotiated truces to maintain loyalty and control. Barons who had previously wavered were brought back into the fold, while rebellious factions were subdued through a combination of military pressure and political concessions. Stephen's ability to adapt to the changing circumstances of civil war distinguished him from other medieval monarchs who relied solely on force or authority. The military campaigns of this era also underscored the human cost of the anarchy. Villages were burned, castles changed hands repeatedly, and civilians endured famine and displacement. Chroniclers recorded that England resembled a land in turmoil, with little distinction between combatants and the population caught in the crossfire. Stephen, aware of the suffering caused by prolonged conflict, attempted to mitigate destruction in some areas. But the chaotic nature of civil war often left such efforts futile. The king's focus remained on consolidating power, securing key strongholds, and maintaining the loyalty of his allies. Yet the toll on the kingdom was undeniable. Stephen's military strategy relied heavily on the network of fortified castles that dotted England. These fortresses served as both defensive positions and administrative centers, projecting royal authority into regions where his control was tenuous. Key strongholds in Bristol, Oxford, and Winchester allowed Stephen to respond quickly to uprisings, while the mobility of his forces enabled him to strike at rebellious territories before opposition could consolidate. Castles were not just military assets. They were symbols of legitimacy and instruments of psychological dominance in a fractured kingdom. The king's personal involvement in battles reinforced his reputation as a warrior. Stephen often led charges, inspected fortifications personally, and participated in planning campaigns. His presence on the battlefield inspired loyalty among knights and foot soldiers alike, who admired his courage and determination. Yet his hands-on approach carried risks. Battlefield injuries, ambushes, and the ever-present danger of capture were constant realities. Despite these dangers, Stephen's active leadership style became a hallmark of his reign, cementing his image as a king who shared the burdens of war with his men. By the mid-1140s, Stephen had regained much of the territory lost to Matilda's faction, but the civil war showed no sign of ending. The kingdom remained divided, with alternating periods of victory and setback. The ongoing conflict highlighted the limitations of medieval kingship. Authority depended not only on personal skill and courage, but also on the loyalty of nobles, the management of resources, and the ability to endure prolonged uncertainty. Stephen's reign, already tested by early challenges, now entered a stage defined by prolonged military struggle, strategic adaptation, and the constant balancing of power, loyalty, and survival. Stephen's campaigns during this period reinforced the central theme of his reign. A king's authority was not guaranteed by coronation alone. It had to be continually fought for, defended, and negotiated. His ability to recover from capture, rally his supporters, and maintain control over large parts of the kingdom demonstrated resilience, political savvy, and a willingness to endure the hardships of prolonged conflict. The anarchy was shaping Stephen not only as a monarch, but as a military strategist and a leader attuned to the complexities of civil war. By the end of this phase of the anarchy, Stephen had proven himself capable of weathering setbacks, leveraging alliances, and leading armies in one of the most tumultuous periods in English history. Yet the war was far from over, and the kingdom's instability foreshadowed decades of continued struggle, shifting loyalties, and personal and political sacrifice. Stephen's reign would be remembered not just for the battles he fought, but for the resilience, cunning, and determination required to hold a crown in a fractured, war-torn land. For escalation of the anarchy, key battles and political maneuvers by the late 1140s, Stephen of Blois had entered a critical phase of his reign. The initial chaos, following Henry I's death, had settled into a prolonged struggle, but the anarchy showed no sign of resolution. England was a fractured kingdom, a patchwork of territories loyal to either Stephen or Empress Matilda, and every decision carried weighty consequences. The king's ability to navigate both the battlefield and the treacherous currents of medieval politics would determine not only his survival but the legacy of his dynasty. One of the most significant turning points came with the Battle of Wilton in 1143, where Stephen's forces faced persistent attacks from Matilda's supporters. The king relied on a combination of fortifications, rapid troop movements, and strategic diplomacy to prevent a complete collapse of his authority in the southwest. Castles such as Salisbury and Devizes became critical defensive outposts, serving as both military strongholds and centers of local governance. These fortresses allowed Stephen to respond quickly to uprisings, demonstrating his understanding that controlling key locations was as important as winning open battles. Stephen's military strategy was increasingly intertwined with political maneuvering. He recognized that some conflicts could not be resolved by force alone and sought alliances with influential barons who controlled crucial territories. Land grants, marriage alliances, and negotiated truces were tools Stephen used to secure loyalty. The delicate balancing act required constant attention. One misstep could tip a powerful noble into Matilda's camp. His court became a center of negotiation, where promises, threats, and favors were wielded as deftly as swords on the battlefield. The ongoing struggle with Empress Matilda was not limited to direct confrontation. Her supporters, including Robert of Gloucester and Geoffrey de Monmouth, conducted raids and sieges that threatened Stephen's control. These attacks required constant vigilance and strategic adaptation. Stephen developed a keen sense of predictive military strategy, anticipating enemy movements and positioning his forces to counter threats before they could escalate. This approach reflected his growing understanding that war was as much about planning, logistics, and psychology as it was about valor. Despite the intensity of the conflict, Stephen's reign was also defined by moments of diplomacy. He attempted to negotiate settlements with Matilda's faction, balancing concessions with displays of strength. His willingness to compromise when strategically advantageous demonstrated political pragmatism, though it sometimes drew criticism for appearing indecisive. Chroniclers would later debate whether these compromises weakened the crown or preserved it during a period when outright victory was impossible. In reality, Stephen's approach allowed him to maintain his position in a kingdom torn apart by war. Throughout this period, Queen Matilda of Boulogne remained an indispensable partner. She managed domestic governance, rallied troops, and negotiated with barons, ensuring that Stephen's authority persisted even when he was on campaign. Her influence extended beyond the domestic sphere. She played a critical role in sustaining morale among loyalists and mediating disputes that could have fractured Stephen's fragile coalition. The partnership between Stephen and Boulogne exemplified how medieval kingship relied not only on personal valor, but also on strategic familial alliances and collaboration. The year 1147 brought renewed military pressure from external forces as well. Stephen faced threats not only from internal rivals, but also from Normandy, where Empress Matilda's supporters could draw on French resources. The king responded by strengthening fortifications along the coast, fortifying strategic towns, and maintaining a network of loyal barons ready to defend against invasion. His capacity to address both internal rebellion and external threat reflected a sophisticated approach to kingship, one that balanced military readiness with political diplomacy. The prolonged conflict took a personal toll on Stephen. Years of campaigning, constant travel, and the pressures of governance tested his health and resilience. Yet he remained deeply involved in every aspect of his reign, leading troops, inspecting fortifications, and making strategic decisions. His hands-on approach inspired loyalty but also exposed him to risk. Chroniclers noted his courage and determination, describing a king who bore the burdens of war alongside his men rather than delegating all responsibility to others. By the end of this phase of the Anarchy, Stephen had secured key regions of England, repelled multiple challenges, and maintained a fragile balance of power. The kingdom was far from unified, and the conflict with Matilda continued, but Stephen's adaptability, strategic vision, and personal courage allowed him to endure. He demonstrated that medieval kingship required more than hereditary claim. It demanded continuous effort, resilience, and the ability to navigate both battlefields and courts with equal skill. Stephen's reign during this period also reflected the importance of legacy and succession. His marriage to Matilda of Boulogne had produced children, ensuring the continuity of his dynasty. Every political maneuver, military campaign, and negotiation was undertaken with the dual goal of maintaining his crown and securing the future of his family. His vision of a stable monarchy, though constantly challenged, guided his decisions and underscored the inseparability of personal ambition and royal duty. The escalation of the anarchy in these years set the stage for decades of further conflict. Stephen's authority rested on a combination of military skill, political acumen, and the loyalty of key allies. His reign demonstrated that kingship in medieval England was not a static privilege, but an ongoing performance, requiring constant attention, adaptation, and courage. The battles, sieges, and negotiations of this era would define Stephen's legacy as a monarch who survived the chaos of civil war through resilience, strategy, and determination. 5. Mid-Anarchy, triumphs, setbacks, and the struggle for supremacy. By the mid-1140s, England was entrenched in the chaos of the anarchy. Stephen of Blois had survived capture, sieges, and the constant machinations of barons' shifting loyalties. Yet, the prolonged civil war was as much a test of endurance as it was of skill. Stephen's ability to adapt, to balance military campaigns with diplomacy, and to sustain the loyalty of key allies defined his continued survival as king. One of Stephen's most significant challenges came in the north and west of England, where barons loyal to Empress Matilda exploited the fragmented political landscape. Castles such as Wallingford, Bristol, and Lincoln became the focus of extended campaigns. Each siege required careful planning, coordination of forces, and meticulous logistics. Stephen proved adept at leveraging his alliances, often calling upon loyal nobles to provide troops, resources, and intelligence. His ability to integrate political negotiation with military action allowed him to recover territories that might otherwise have been lost. The Battle of Oxford 1142 exemplified Stephen's resilience and strategic mind. Matilda herself had been besieged in Oxford Castle, and Stephen maneuvered his forces with precision to pressure her faction without overextending his army. Though the battle ended inconclusively, it demonstrated his capacity to respond effectively to rapidly changing situations, balancing aggression with caution. Even stalemates in these engagements reinforced Stephen's authority, signaling to the nobility that he remained a capable and determined ruler despite the prolonged nature of the conflict. Stephen's reliance on loyal barons and regional allies was both a strength and a potential vulnerability. Nobles such as William of Ypres and Rainulf of Chester provided critical military support, yet their ambitions sometimes conflicted with Stephen's interests. The king's skill lay in his ability to negotiate, reward loyalty, and at times curb the excesses of powerful magnates without alienating them entirely. These delicate maneuvers reflected the complexities of medieval kingship, where authority was rarely absolute, and success depended on a careful blend of force, persuasion, and strategic concessions. Meanwhile, Stephen's domestic governance grew more sophisticated. He maintained courts, oversaw justice, and ensured that taxation and administration supported the ongoing war effort. The constant demands of civil war required not only military leadership but also the ability to sustain the kingdom's economy and administrative functions. Stephen's attention to these matters highlighted a crucial aspect of his reign. The monarchy's survival depended not solely on the battlefield but on the efficient management of resources, alliances, and loyal subjects. During these years, Stephen also demonstrated a remarkable degree of personal resilience and leadership under pressure. Chroniclers noted his courage, his willingness to be present on the battlefield, and his capacity to inspire loyalty in difficult circumstances. He understood that the perception of strength was as critical as actual military victories. By maintaining a visible presence among his troops, overseeing key fortresses, and actively participating in negotiations with barons, Stephen reinforced the legitimacy of his crown in the eyes of his followers. Despite these successes, the war exacted a heavy toll on the population in the kingdom. Villages were repeatedly besieged or pillaged, and civilians endured famine and displacement. The repeated back and forths of sieges and counterattacks created a climate of fear and instability. Stephen, while focused on maintaining power, was aware of the suffering caused by prolonged conflict. His efforts to stabilize key regions and protect loyal towns reflect his understanding that monarchy was as much about governance and protection as it was about conquest. Stephen's family life also played a critical role during this period. Queen Matilda of Boulogne continued to be a vital partner, coordinating political alliances, raising funds, and managing territories in Stephen's absence. Their children, particularly Eustace of Boulogne, were groomed to carry forward the dynasty's ambitions, ensuring that the crown would remain linked to Stephen's bloodline. The intertwining of family, politics, and warfare illustrates the broader strategy Stephen employed. The survival of his reign depended on a combination of personal leadership, dynastic planning, and political acumen. By the late 1140s, Stephen had achieved a delicate balance. While Empress Matilda continued to challenge his authority, he had stabilized much of southern and central England. His victories, though often temporary, demonstrated his capacity to recover from setbacks and maintain the loyalty of critical allies. At the same time, his willingness to negotiate, grant concessions, and strategically compromise prevented the complete collapse of his kingdom. Stephen's mid-reign period illustrates the duality of his kingship, a warrior on the battlefield and a diplomat at court, constantly navigating the treacherous currents of civil war. The enduring lesson of this phase of Stephen's reign is clear. Legitimacy and power in medieval England were not secured by a coronation alone. Authority required constant reinforcement through military skill, political negotiation, and the careful management of allies and enemies alike. Stephen's ability to survive and maintain his crown through the mid-years of the Anarchy reflects a monarch shaped by adversity, capable of both strategic calculation and personal courage. By the end of this period, England remained divided, but Stephen's position was secure enough to prepare for the next stage of the conflict. Renewed offensives, strategic diplomacy, and the ongoing struggle to ensure the continuity of his dynasty. His reign, defined by resilience, adaptability, and the intertwining of personal ambition with the demands of kingship, had begun to leave a lasting imprint on the monarchy, demonstrating the challenges and complexities of ruling during one of England's most turbulent periods. 6. Late stages of the Anarchy. Turning points in dynastic struggle. By the 1150s, Stephen of Blois' reign had entered a critical and precarious phase. The prolonged civil war known as the Anarchy had ravaged England for nearly 2 decades, and while Stephen retained significant power, his kingdom was far from fully stabilized. The ongoing contest with Empress Matilda and her supporters had produced victories, setbacks, and the constant shifting of allies. Now the challenge was not only to maintain his authority, but to secure the crown for his heirs, a task made all the more urgent by the emergence of new political players and the growing exhaustion of the nobility and populace. Stephen's military campaigns during these years were characterized by strategic caution and selective engagement. Years of fighting had depleted resources, and prolonged sieges had exhausted both his forces and his treasury. He increasingly relied on fortifications and loyal barons to maintain control over critical regions. Castles like Winchester, Bristol, and Wallingford became linchpins of his strategy, serving as defensive strongholds and administrative centers. Stephen understood that in a fragmented kingdom, physical control of key points was just as crucial as winning open battles. The political landscape also required deft maneuvering. Empress Matilda's forces, though weakened, remained capable of destabilizing regions loyal to Stephen. Many barons had grown weary of continuous conflict and were seeking compromise, opportunistically shifting alliances between the rival claimants. Stephen had to maintain a delicate balance, rewarding loyalty without encouraging overreach, punishing defection without alienating potential supporters, and projecting authority without exhausting his limited resources. His experience, charisma, and strategic acumen allowed him to navigate these challenges effectively. One of the most significant developments in this period was the growing prominence of Stephen's heir, Eustace of Blois. Stephen worked tirelessly to secure Eustace's position as his successor, arranging alliances, marriages, and territorial grants to bolster his claim. Eustace's presence on the battlefield, often alongside his father, reinforced the dynasty's visibility and legitimacy. For Stephen, securing the crown for his lineage was not simply a matter of inheritance. It was a continuation of his long struggle to stabilize the monarchy and ensure England's governance under his family. In 1153, the Anarchy approached a turning point. Empress Matilda's claim had weakened significantly, and her forces were less capable of mounting coordinated campaigns. New threats arose in the form of baronial unrest and opportunistic nobles seeking to exploit the ongoing instability. Stephen had to act decisively to prevent renewed upheaval. He launched targeted campaigns to reinforce loyal territories, negotiated truces with wavering barons, and solidified alliances with neighboring rulers who could influence England's internal affairs. His combination of military, political, and diplomatic strategies exemplified the sophisticated leadership required to survive in a kingdom torn by civil war. Throughout this period, Stephen's personal leadership remained a critical factor. Chroniclers describe a king who, despite years of conflict, continued to inspire loyalty through presence, courage, and decisiveness. He led troops in battle when necessary, oversaw the defense of strategic towns and castles, and maintained close communication with his barons. Stephen's ability to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances and respond effectively to crises allowed him to maintain authority where lesser rulers might have faltered. The role of Queen Matilda of Boulogne continued to be vital. She coordinated domestic governance, managed critical territories, and served as a mediator among the nobility. Her political skill ensured that Stephen's authority was reinforced in his absence, and her influence helped maintain the cohesion of the king's faction. The partnership between Stephen and Boulogne was central to the resilience of the crown during these years of prolonged conflict. By the end of 1153, the political and military landscape had shifted enough to allow a negotiated settlement. The Treaty of Winchester formalized a compromise. Stephen would remain king for the remainder of his life, but Henry, son of Empress Matilda, would be recognized as his heir. This arrangement reflected the culmination of Stephen's efforts to maintain authority while ensuring a degree of dynastic continuity. While it was not the unchallenged victory he had once hoped for, it represented a pragmatic resolution to decades of war and a recognition of the limitations imposed by prolonged civil conflict. The late stages of the Anarchy highlighted several enduring themes of Stephen's reign. His ability to combine military skill, political acumen, and dynastic foresight allowed him to maintain the crown under circumstances that would have defeated a lesser ruler. The wars demonstrated the fragility of medieval kingship, where authority depended not only on personal claim, but also on the ability to negotiate, inspire loyalty, and respond effectively to constant threats. Stephen's efforts to secure the succession of his children illustrate the deep connection between personal ambition and the broader responsibilities of monarchy. Stephen's legacy during these years also includes his resilience in the face of adversity. Despite years of warfare, shifting loyalties, and personal setbacks including imprisonment and repeated military challenges, he maintained control over significant portions of England. His reign demonstrated that the survival of the crown in turbulent times required a combination of courage, strategy, and the ability to balance force with diplomacy. Seven. Final years. Consolidation of power and legacy. By the mid-1150s, Stephen of Blois was a king tempered by decades of relentless warfare, political intrigue, and the constant challenge of sustaining authority in a fractured kingdom. The anarchy had left England scarred. Towns and villages had been ravaged. Barons wielded quasi-independent power, and the population had endured famine, lawlessness, and uncertainty. Yet through it all, Stephen had preserved the crown, defended his dynasty, and laid the foundations for eventual stability. His final years as king were less about active warfare and more about consolidation, governance, and ensuring the continuity of his bloodline. Following the Treaty of Winchester in 1153, a compromise was established. Stephen would remain king until his death, but Henry, the son of Empress Matilda, would succeed him. This pragmatic agreement reflected Stephen's understanding that a compromise was preferable to continued destruction. By recognizing Henry as his heir, Stephen sought to secure peace for the realm while protecting the dignity and legacy of his dynasty. Though not a decisive victory in the traditional sense, This arrangement allowed Stephen to end his reign with the crown still firmly on his head and his family's status preserved. Even in these later years, Stephen demonstrated the qualities that had defined his reign: resilience, pragmatism, and political foresight. He focused on stabilizing regions previously devastated by conflict, reinforcing loyalty among barons, and ensuring the proper administration of justice. He repaired fortifications, restored towns, and reasserted royal authority in areas that had experienced lawlessness. His efforts were both practical and symbolic. They signaled to the nobility and commoners alike that the monarchy remained intact and capable of providing order after decades of turmoil. Stephen's relationship with his queen, Matilda of Boulogne, continued to play a critical role. Together, they oversaw the management of estates, the coordination of military resources, and the maintenance of political alliances. Queen Matilda's diplomacy and administrative acumen complemented Stephen's leadership, highlighting the collaborative nature of medieval monarchy. Their partnership ensured that the crown's authority persisted even as the king's focus shifted from warfare to governance. The king's children, particularly Eustace of Boulogne, were central to Stephen's dynastic ambitions. Eustace had been groomed throughout the Anarchy, accompanying his father on campaigns and learning the intricate balance of warfare, diplomacy, and governance. Stephen sought to establish a legacy that would extend beyond his lifetime, ensuring that his lineage retained influence even as the succession passed to Henry. Tragically, Eustace died unexpectedly in 1153, before Stephen himself. This loss profoundly affected the king, forcing him to reconsider the future of his dynasty and ultimately making the treaty with Henry all the more necessary. Despite these personal and political challenges, Stephen remained committed to the principles of kingship he had honed over decades. He maintained a visible presence in his court, presided over legal matters, and ensured that the machinery of government continued to function effectively. His reign demonstrated that the survival of the monarchy required not only military skill but also administrative competence, the careful cultivation of alliances, and the ability to negotiate complex political landscapes. Stephen's health began to decline in the final years of his life. The physical and emotional toll of decades of warfare, coupled with the stresses of governance, left him vulnerable. Yet even as his strength waned, he remained mentally sharp, attending to state matters, issuing decrees, and guiding his family in matters of succession. His determination to preserve the monarchy and safeguard his dynasty exemplified the endurance and resilience that had characterized his entire reign. In the broader historical context, Stephen's reign represents a pivotal chapter in the evolution of the English monarchy. Though often overshadowed by other rulers, his ability to maintain the crown during one of England's most turbulent periods ensured the continuity of governance, the preservation of royal authority, and the eventual transition to the Plantagenet line under Henry II. Stephen demonstrated that kingship was not simply a matter of inheritance. It required courage, strategy, diplomacy, and adaptability. Stephen's final years also reflected his understanding of legacy. Beyond immediate military and political concerns, he sought to reinforce the monarchy's long-term stability. By negotiating a succession that included his rival's heir, he avoided further devastation and positioned England for recovery. His pragmatic approach to governance, combined with the lessons learned from decades of conflict, left a monarchy capable of enduring challenges, consolidating authority, and ultimately transitioning into a more centralized and effective institution. When Stephen died in 1154, he left behind a kingdom weary from war but fundamentally intact. The crown passed peacefully to Henry II, initiating a new era in English history. Though Stephen's reign had been defined by conflict, his leadership ensured that the monarchy survived one of its most perilous periods. His ability to balance personal ambition, dynastic concerns, and the demands of kingship left an enduring imprint on the institution he had defended so tenaciously. Stephen of Blois, the king who had risen amid chaos, weathered captures, sieges, and decades of civil war, concluded his reign as a monarch who had secured the crown, preserved his dynasty, and navigated England through an era of unprecedented turmoil. His final years were not marked by dramatic conquests, but by steady consolidation, prudent governance, and preparation for a peaceful transition, hallmarks of a ruler who had learned that survival and stability were the ultimate victories in a kingdom shaped by war. Final consolidation and enduring impact. As Stephen of Blois entered the final phase of his reign in the early 1150s. His focus shifted from active military campaigns to the consolidation of authority and the stabilization of a kingdom exhausted by decades of civil war. The Anarchy had left England divided, its economy strained, and its population traumatized by prolonged conflict. Stephen, now a seasoned ruler, tempered by adversity, recognized that the survival of the monarchy depended not on further conquest, but on careful administration, reconciliation, and the strategic preparation of succession. The Treaty of Winchester, 1153, had established a critical framework for peace. While Stephen would remain king until his death, Henry, the son of Empress Matilda, was formally recognized as his heir. This pragmatic compromise reflected Stephen's understanding of political realities. With his own son Eustace deceased, securing the continuity of governance through a negotiated settlement was essential to prevent renewed devastation. By accepting Henry as his successor, Stephen demonstrated a remarkable balance of pragmatism and foresight, prioritizing the stability of the realm over personal ambition. Stephen devoted his final years to reinforcing royal authority across England. He repaired and strengthened key fortresses, including Winchester, Oxford, and Bristol, ensuring that these centers of power could maintain order even after his passing. Administrative reforms were enacted to stabilize taxation, maintain justice, and regulate baronial disputes, illustrating Stephen's understanding that a kingdom's survival required effective governance as much as military might. He was determined that England emerge from the chaos of civil war not only intact but capable of sustained peace under a strong monarchy. The king also focused on rebuilding relationships with the nobility. After years of warfare, trust had been eroded, and alliances were fragile. Stephen used a combination of negotiation, concessions, and the reinforcement of loyalty to mend fractured bonds. By addressing grievances and rewarding faithful supporters, he strengthened the monarchy's influence and prevented baronial power from undermining royal authority. His diplomacy reflected a keen awareness that the stability of the crown rested on the balance between centralized power and the interests of influential nobles. Queen Matilda of Boulogne remained a central figure in this consolidation. Her political acumen, personal diplomacy, and ability to manage estates were indispensable in ensuring that the crown's influence remained effective throughout the kingdom. She represented continuity, authority, and stability, reinforcing Stephen's leadership and projecting strength in regions where his personal presence was limited. Their partnership exemplified the collaborative nature of medieval kingship, where the queen's role was crucial to the maintenance of dynastic and political stability. Stephen's personal legacy was also intertwined with his approach to kingship. Unlike rulers who relied solely on inheritance, he demonstrated that authority was earned and maintained through courage, resilience, and adaptability. His years of campaigning, negotiation, and careful administration reflected a monarch who had learned from setbacks and emerged capable of sustaining his rule despite enormous challenges. Chroniclers of the time emphasized his courage, pragmatism, and the unwavering determination with which he defended his crown. During these final years, Stephen also reflected on the lessons of his reign. He had witnessed the devastation wrought by prolonged civil war, the fragility of succession, and the volatile loyalties of barons. He understood that a strong monarchy required not only military prowess but also political wisdom, administrative competence, and the capacity for compromise when circumstances demanded. By preparing England for a peaceful transition to Henry II, Stephen ensured that the monarchy could endure beyond his own lifetime, testament to his foresight and strategic vision. Stephen's death in 1154 marked the end of a turbulent but resilient reign. His passing allowed Henry II to ascend the throne without immediate conflict, a transition made possible by Stephen's careful planning and pragmatic compromise. England, weary from decades of civil war, now faced a new era of stability under the planted. While Stephen's reign had been defined by battles, sieges, and political uncertainty, his efforts to consolidate authority, maintain loyalty, and secure the succession ensured that the monarchy survived one of its most perilous periods. The enduring impact of Stephen of Blois is multifaceted. Militarily, he demonstrated that personal courage and leadership could sustain a ruler through prolonged conflict. Politically, he navigated a fractured nobility with pragmatism and strategic foresight. Dynastically, he safeguarded the continuity of governance, even when personal ambition and dynastic loss threatened to undermine his authority. The survival of the English crown through the Anarchy and the eventual smooth transition to Henry II owes much to Stephen's resilience, adaptability, and commitment to the monarchy. Stephen's reign serves as a reminder that kingship in medieval England was never guaranteed by birth alone. Authority was a continuous performance, requiring courage on the battlefield, skill in negotiation, and the ability to endure prolonged crises. Through his decades of struggle, Stephen of Blois exemplified the qualities necessary to survive, preserve the crown, and leave a legacy of stability amid chaos. His life and reign illustrate the interplay between personal ambition, dynastic responsibility, and the broader demands of governance, offering enduring lessons on leadership, resilience, and the enduring power of monarchy. His crown, forged amid the fires of the Anarchy, survived because of his courage, strategic thinking, and unwavering commitment to his dynasty. The legacy of Stephen of Blois is one of survival, resilience, and the enduring authority of a king who faced extraordinary challenges yet ensured that the monarchy would continue to shape England as destiny for generations. Conclusion: the legacy of Stephen of Blois